Hello, welcome to another tutorial video. We're going to be looking at Of Mice and Men in detail, focusing on each of the characters in the sections to try and get a fuller understanding of them. Now, the philosophy or the background idea I'm going to be using for this is this mnemonic here, SLACT, and basically this is really important because it helps you to get a full understanding of the picture that the writer is trying to paint, because they actually give us the character in different ways. Obviously the thing that people analyze most is the speech that the characters say, which is obviously hugely important, but we also need to look at the language the writer uses to describe them, the actions that the character will perform, and also the character comments, what other characters say about the character in question. D is also about stage directions, which is very important in plays, but obviously not relevant for our novella. So just think of these SLAC as we're going through. So we start off with George then, and here the very first thing we hear about George is that two men emerge from the path, and so they're coming into this clearing. But we're told just before that this is a path beaten hard by boys coming down from the ranches. Now that's really important because metaphorically they're joining this same kind of circle. So it's kind of Steinbeck's pitching them all, or putting them all together under kind of one umbrella, as it were, and they're basically people with no future, people who will have no success. So before we've even met them, the very first thing that Steinbeck has told us is that these people will have no success and no future, as they are just like all the other boys who come from the ranches. And that's obviously kind of the theme of the novel, about the plight of these kind of workers and how the American dream is a fallacy. And it's really important just to know that it's kind of struck onto us as soon as we first meet them, and obviously that's the tone that's set then for the rest of the novella. Second quotation then, one stayed behind the other. Obviously this shows us that George is in control, because George is at the front of this pair. George is in control and George has the power, and George is like the master of the dog, or the master of the pet, which is obviously very relevant to Lenny's understanding of Lenny a little later on. The first man was small and quick, dark of face with restless eyes and sharp, strong features. Obviously, this small and quick and dark face is a great contrast to Lenny, and basically the darker face here obviously maybe shows some kind of troubled thoughts, not just the sun beating down on him, but maybe it's kind of a worn out man, a man that's, kind of carrying a lot of burdens with him. And obviously on a very obvious level, it's the idea of Lenny and obviously Lenny's drain on him, but further to that, obviously, it's the idea that he probably knows that his life isn't really going to go anywhere, and that obviously might metaphorically be striking, a darkness in his face, as well as the sun-beaten aspect. He's got restless eyes, so he's always trying to think of ideas, and obviously he's uncomfortable in situations, and he's got sharp, strong features, which just shows us he's a man of action. He's a man that can actually do things, but unfortunately in his period, in his time, he can't get anything done, which is all the more sad for him. When we see his kind of paternal instincts towards Lenny, you're going to be sick like you was last night. It's like a parent talking to a child. Obviously, people have a right as adults to look after themselves, but obviously Lenny can't. So we see this paternal instinct that he has. And then he's kind of a bit dismissive. We see a dismissive aspect of him. He says, "You drink out of a gutter if you was thirsty." And then we see the quotation he says about the truck driver who's dropped them off, goddamn near 4 miles, that's what it was. And then a little later on he says, I bet you it was more than 4 miles. And this is interesting only for the same reason that he repeats it very quickly in sharp succession, showing his frustration, one, but secondly kind of showing maybe perhaps the limited conversation he can have with Lenny. He's just got to talk about the mundane and repeat it and moan, and maybe it's a kind of reflection on the conversation he has to have with Lenny, more than it's just a reflection on how annoying the walk, or the extra walk was. I got to tell you again, do I again? So that tells us that he has to repeat everything to Lenny, and that Lenny isn't very intelligent, and that obviously George is frustrated by it. And then he calls him a crazy bastard. So he's not a very couth man, even though we say he's paternal. Well, he's not paternal in the sense of a mothering figure. Maybe it's more very fathery. Sometimes a father stereotypically will actually say what needs to be said, whereas a mother stereotypically again will kind of try and make everything sound as sweet as possible. And again, when talking about the work card, he says, "You never had none," and again he repeats that phrase, "I got them both here, you think I'd let you carry your own work card?" And then obviously saying this to Lenny shows how ridiculous the idea is, and then obviously tells us how ridiculous the idea is. And we get an idea of the responsibility that George has to have towards Lenny, and the amount that he has to look after him. Then in his command to to hand over the dead animal, the dead mouse, sorry, that Lenny has, he shouts and he says, "Lenny, give it here." And again, it's very paternal, very strong, and Lenny obeys. And that's really important because it shows us that George is in control here. So we've got that master pet relationship being kind of shown to us. And we kind of get a summation of their lives and how it's gone so far when he tells us that we're going to work on a ranch like the one we've come from up north. So this gives us an idea that they are purely itinerant workers moving from place to place. We don't know yet why they've moved, but we know they have moved, and for whatever reason, that itinerant workers move on, work dries up, or an issue happens, etc., etc. That's their lives and they're doomed for it. So the first thing he tells us about his past is again affirming this kind of quote from earlier, that they're kind of doing the same as everyone else from the ranches came, because moving from ranch to ranch was exactly how the lives of those people in that time, in that space, was. Again, the commanding aspect says, "But you ain't going to say a word." And then he talks to him again like rather, you can say like parent, you can say like a dog. Sorry, it talks to him like a dog, and he says, "You're a good boy, that's swell." So again, it's a very childlike affirmation.